Welcome all to our first installment of the online PD for our new school year. I've decided to handle this topic in this manner so that you can pause, replay various parts based on your needs and your obvious time constraints. You're probably familiar with this type of planning, but I wanted to lay it out in this manner because it's going to be an expectation of all staff to plan this way. Um, and I want everyone to hear the same message. The best way to explain backward design, and this is pretty poignant coming off of summer vacation, is to put you in the position of a tour guide. Um, Pretend you were taking a trip to Rome and you had 2 hours to go to the Roman Colosseum and you wanted to tour this site. What type of tour guide would you want? The type of tour guide I would want would use that time in the most effective and efficient way so that I would get all the information I needed in order to walk out of there feeling like I learned something new, where I can connect it to some prior learnings. Maybe I went to Pompeii and there were ruins there, but also provide for the basis of future learnings, maybe the Roman Empire or gladiator battles. Um, So, as I embark on this type of um, this, I'm sorry, I was on the wrong page. Um, Embark on this. I want you to keep in mind Stephen Covey, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, that in planning this year and in the future, we're going to begin with an end in mind means to start with clear understanding of your destination. Where do you want the students to go given the content that you have to deliver? You have to know where you're going so that you take the steps so that you're in the right direction. We can't lose a minute of time with these kids in the classroom. So, backward design, simply stated, is task analysis. What do we have to teach our students? And what do they need to understand? And how are we going to get them to do that? So, what we do not want to do with this type of design is to create assessments as we near the end of a unit. What have we taught them? What do we think that we need to know? Instead of that, because time constraints at that point, I'm sure I have, as an educator, have fallen into this trap. Oh my goodness, if I just taught it in this way, I think it would have rolled out a little easier, or I don't have time to teach this, but it was in the TEK, a supporting standard. So what we do want to do is prioritize those standards in terms of assessment evidence. What would we accept as evidence from students as we understand the problems, understand the concepts, I'm sorry. So here's the process. The first thing is we have to identify the desired results. What will they know or what will they be able to do by the end of the unit? The next would be determine acceptable evidence. How will we know what the student is understanding based on the standards? And what evidence will prove their understanding? How will they apply that understanding? And the last will be plan learning experiences and instruction. That would be what appropriate instructional activities are we going to present with our students? Facts, skills, activities to help them with knowledge and application of the content. Given a task, how do we best equip students to display their knowledge? So let's begin with identifying the desired results. We want to create an experience for students where they are provided some big ideas and the most important understandings relevant to the retention of necessary details. It will be applicable to new situations within and beyond this subject. This part is essential for learning. Moving on to the next step, how do we determine acceptable evidence? It's so important to know, to involve the student in the doing of the subject. This moves the student from a passive learner to creating authentic learning experience, and maybe take a more active role and construct meaning. How are we going to give them these opportunities, and then allow them to reflect. So for this step, we're going to plan for learning experiences and instruction. It's the teacher's job to make clear and the connection between the content and the broader spectrum of the subject. Here's where we decide which concepts are interesting, thought-provoking, connect to other learning, and what do students need to be familiar with in order to provide a very strong foundation. So let's jump into a math TEK, sixth grade math TEK, which is a readiness standard, 6.13a. Let's identify the desired result. And given the TEK, I designed it in this way. Students will interpret numeric data summarized in dot plots, stem and leaf plots, histograms, and box plots. So as we analyze that TEK, we have to think like an assessor before we design the lessons. We would have to look back on the building block TEK from fifth grade that the students would have had to have mastered in order to jump right into this. So we can look at the field guide to see what the academic vocabulary is that they would have to understand in order to build upon that. At that point, I would probably go back to the fifth grade TEK, find those key vocabulary points, and expose them to those in the first couple of days. You never know what gaps kids are coming to you with. So put everyone on a equal playing field. First step for this would be, here we go, introduce the academic vocabulary. And I listed those there, greater than, the comparative language, greater than, less than, equal to, joining, separating, dot plot, etc. So first they would have to identify, know how to identify that. That could be a quick quiz test where the answers are simple and content focused, pretty factual. What is this? This is a stem and leaf plot. What is this? It's a histogram. What does this show us? Things like that. The data in this scatter plot, it's showing that column A is greater than column B, things like that. Very simple, factual, concrete. Then next we would have them represent. We want to get them to the interpretation part of this TEK, but we would have to familiarize them with the lower level Bloom's taxonomy verbs. So we would go to, let's see, the representation. We could give them data and have them represent it on one of those organizational graphs, and we can, that also would probably be, that's more of a performance-based task. Can they take the data and represent it? Last, we would want them to interpret, which is the actual TEK, that 6.13, and where they would have to interpret. So at that point, we can have them, give them an academic prompt. So this is more of a critical thinking type assessment where they would have to take it, represent it, and then analyze it. So this would be, based on the instructional focus document and timeline of teaching, you would put that in a sequence in which your students, it was realistic for them to understand this. The best way that I can explain this in a layman's term is, if you were teaching swimming, you wouldn't throw your student in the pool and say, okay, swim, and there's your summative. You would first bring them in there and teach them how to blow bubbles and put their face in the water. That would be the, pre-teaching, reteaching, review of all that content vocabulary. Then you may teach them a different type of stroke, or do you know what this stroke is called? That would be the representation. Then they would swim a little bit and then go back. That would be more of a formative assessment, step by step by step, so they weren't, and then remind them to put their face in the water and blow bubbles. And And then by the end, that final TEK, that 6.13, where they're interpreting and analyzing, that would be the swimming across the pool. So you know exactly where they are at every stage of their acquisition of the skill needed to perform not just that grade level TEK, but to build upon TEKs, that skill needed for the next school years.